between yourselves and lunch, so I will try to be as concise as possible. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Gag for giving me the opportunity to be with you today and more or less tell you how the European Commission and the European Union are looking about climate change. Thank you. I will take more or less a policy scenario to see how we examine, let's say, the present situation about the Paris Agreement. It's interesting that the title, the theme of the conference is Renewable Energy, Global Cooperation for Sustainability. And it's true, unless there's going to be global cooperation, we're not going to achieve the Paris Agreement objectives. And I took the liberty to title my presentation, EU and India Working Together. Because it's true, unless we work together on a bilateral basis, international basis, again, I would say the Paris objectives, they're never going to be met, and we're going to fall short. Needless to say that this was a historic agreement, what was signed in Paris. Basically, a new complete chapter, international cooperation on climate change, has been created. And it took a long time to be done. And of course, that's why at this moment nobody would like to reopen the discussions. It would be like reopening the Pandora's box. It was also a kind of a win-win situation for multilateral cooperation. And we're moving away from national policies and we try to see how we can integrate, how we can learn from each other, not only from, let's say, Europe and North America to developing economies, but also vice versa, and we need each other for that. And of course, at the same time, it gives a very strong message to the investors, to the technology developers, because it takes a lot of investment and a lot of effort and resources to take something from the lab scale into the pilot, into the demo place, into the industry for deployment. And along this road, unless this, let's say, unless the investor can see the light at the end of the tunnel, that there's going to be investment in various technologies like in wind and PV, the investment are going to take place. So it's a very important, I would say, international step towards trying to fight climate change. In Marrakesh also was very important because very quickly the agreement was put into force. And at the same time, there was a change in the government, the US, and that created a kind of insecurity. But at the same time, Marrakesh, the European Union, together with China, they put a leading role and tried to more or less reinforce that here we are, we're going to do it, we're going to achieve the targets of the Paris commitment, and let's stick all together. And as was said before by Dr. Keller, although the government has taken a different line in the US, the industry and some of the states, they still want to meet the Paris objective, at least as they have done it with their own policies. Now, again, it was said before that the G20 meeting in Germany, the confirmation was done. We have to meet the targets. They are irreversible. We cannot discuss them again. And there was actually the G20 plan for action. It was put into, it was adopted. And for the moment, only Russia and Turkey, they have not really ratified yet the plans. But the main message is the international community is moving forward. India is part of the international community, and of course, we need India to remain into that. This is more or less what has been achieved in the European Union, and it's basically a very strong message. You can actually continue having the growth of GDP while at the same moment reducing significantly your greenhouse gas emissions. And indeed, if you can see that between 1990 and 1930, the greenhouse gas emissions has been planned to be reduced by 60–80%. And that has to continue, and so on. So that has an achievement that has been done. And of course, we don't want to be arrogant and say we have done it. We do realize, as was said before by Mr. Gillen, that if we really aim to go towards the 2-degree scenario, much more has to be done at all levels. The Commission took very strong action immediately, basically, to try to improve and more or less focus all the directives and the policies and the legislation according to the Paris Agreement. And for example, there was a reform of the emission trading scheme. There was a plan for the circular economy. By that we mean, in their vocabulary, we have the term waste. But actually, there is no real waste. Waste is a resource, and nothing should be wasted. So anything waste should be reused, reclaimed. If possible, if you cannot use it anymore, you can put it for energy purposes and so on. So we have to rethink how we treat waste. At the same time, there was the effort sharing between member states for buildings and transport and agriculture. As was said before by several speakers, transport is a critical area. It's the only area of the economy that the greenhouse gas emissions continues to increase. In all the other areas of the economy, the greenhouse gas emissions have been decreasing. transport is the only one that is increasing, and that is not only the European Union, but it's also global somehow. There were new accounting rules for carbon stock changes. We have also low emission mobility. New policies were put forward, and again, these new policies look a lot about, for example, using advanced biofuels in replacing fossil fuels. There are new funds. I mean, there was the discussion about the European Fund Strategic Investment. That was new money was put in, and that is for European projects to be developed. But at the same time, a new one was created, the European External Investment Plan, which actually has 44 billion euros, and that is more or less to help developing economies, more or less putting into practice plans and programs about climate change. There is the new policy on renewable, on clean energy for all Europeans, and that was basically a proposal for a directive addressing renewable energies, addressing energy efficiency, and addressing for the first time heating and cooling. And this is for discussion at this moment in Brussels with the Parliament and the Council. And finally, there was a review of the implementation of the EU adaptation strategy, because we have to adapt the way we're living, the way we more or less use resources, the way we drive, the way we use fuels, and so on. This is more or less what we think the EU has to do in order to meet the policies. We do expect that we're going to have, at least by 2050, we're going to have an 80% domestic reduction. And we can do that with the technologies we have at this moment available, of course, with a lot of innovation among them. We will need behavioral changes because, for example, huge quantities of food are thrown by the supermarkets almost on a daily basis. That is a waste. And at the same time, all the economic sectors have to contribute more or less in order to meet the targets. And you pay attention here, transport is the only one which for the moment has not been able to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. So basically we have the pathway that we're going to achieve, we hope to achieve 25% by 2020. And basically after 2020, 20% every decade, so that by 2050 we can be down to 80%. This is more or less the situation of the G20. And you will see that, I don't know whether you can see it, it's not very clear, but in a way, this is a figure of the greenhouse gas emissions versus the GDP. And India is very low, while on the other hand, Australia is the highest. And of course, you see, for example, European Union somewhere in the middle, and we have to drop to go much lower. Now, of course, we cannot have the same policies and the same targets for the different member states and different countries. Different countries have different policies, try to more or less manage individually what they plan to do about meeting the climate change. But what is important, that all of us were going to share the same objective about the Paris Agreement. This is, again, most probably you can't see that, but basically it shows that although with the present policies, what has been proposed for the moment, we are more or less convinced that we can achieve about 3 degrees increase. If we're going to have the implementation and new commitments, we should go down to 2%. But for that, we need new technologies, new policies, and new legislation, practically with all let's say, signatories of the Paris Agreement. What is expected by the countries who have implemented the Paris Agreement? Ratification, the implementation on the various policies, to update these policies by 2020's commitment, mid-century strategies to see how to particularly prepare and communicate a strategy by 2050, what are the national targets to be achieved, and so on. And these are commitments that have to be done. And of course, from all of us, adaptation action. How we're going to adapt the way we live, the way we produce energy, the way we produce food, the way we drive, all those kind of things. And finally, we have to enhance the monitoring and reporting systems so that the accountability from different parties can be followed very closely. This is what I have to thank you for following the discussion. We look, I repeat, the European Union is looking forward to working with you, we're working with India in meeting climate change. Thank you.